This video isn't what you think it is. It's not a recovery story. It's not a cautionary tale. I'm not going to tell you I hit rock bottom, found redemption, and now I want to share the 12 steps. This is a practical leadership conversation about something that I think is happening in this industry at a scale that nobody is talking about honestly, and what it actually does, not just to your health in the abstract, but to the mornings, the decision making, the emotional regulation, your team, and your ability to lead the thing that you built. The version of this I want to talk about is the one that doesn't look like a problem, the functioning version, the version where you're showing up, the business is running, nothing has visibly collapsed, and if you're being darkly honest about it, you were actually pretty good at it. That version, that's the one almost no one is talking about in this space, and that's the one this video is for. Welcome to the Lead Well channel, where we explore the inner world of leadership, well-being, and what it means to build a business and a life that doesn't break you. My name's Trevor, and I've run a multi-award-winning restaurant and cocktail bar, but I didn't come from a hospitality background. I built the business from the ground on up, learning as I went, figuring it out in real time. And there was a period of that journey where alcohol was a significant part of how I was managing the pressure of doing it, where other forms of self-medication were also part of the picture, where the ungoverned evenings were quietly undoing everything I was trying to build in the governed hours. I want to be clear about what this video is before we go any further. I'm not here to tell you to get sober. I still have the occasional drink. What I'm here to do is to have an honest conversation about what the pattern of numbing actually costs a founder in practical, functional leadership terms. Because I think a lot of people watching this are living some version of what I'm about to describe and have never heard it framed this way before. Here's the thing about the version of this I lived. It didn't look like what you picture when you hear the word problem. I wasn't destroying relationships. I wasn't making decisions that severely damaged my life or my business. I wasn't spending everything I had. I wasn't showing up to work visibly impaired. The stories I'd heard about people who had really lost control to alcohol and other substances, those stories didn't match what I was living. And because they didn't match, the story I told myself was that what I was doing was completely within acceptable limits. I was, if I'm being completely honest about it, pretty good at getting by. And that's exactly the problem, because getting by and leading well are not the same thing. And for a long time, I confused the fact that things weren't visibly falling apart with evidence that everything was fine. What was actually happening was something quieter and more significant. When you know there are problems you don't know how to face, when the weight of the business and the identity and the responsibility has become more than you have the tools to carry cleanly, getting on it becomes a purpose. The evening arrives, the day has been heavy, and suddenly there's something with a clear trajectory, a first drink that has a logic to it, a direction that feels like its own form of forward motion. And while you're inside that, the other thing gets moved. The problems that have been sitting at the front of your mind find their way to the back. The pressure that's been there all day lifts temporarily, and that temporary lifting is real. It works, and that's the honest thing about it. In the short term, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. Purpose, even the wrong kind, is still purpose. And a mind that's been carrying the weight of running a hospitality business all day long will take whatever kind of purpose it can get at the end of it. Alcohol is the most obvious version of this in the hospitality industry, but it's worth naming that for some founders, it's other things too. Other forms of numbing and self-medicating that serve the same function. The specific substance matters less than the pattern of reaching for something external to manage something internal. The pattern of the ungoverned evening as the release valve for everything the governed hours couldn't process. Before I talk about what this does to a leader, I want to spend a moment on why the hospitality industry specifically makes the pattern almost invisible. This is an industry whose commercial success is partly built on the idea that another drink is always a good idea. The metrics of hospitality include spend per head. Every additional drink ordered by every customer is revenue. We are professionally invested in the idea that alcohol and a good time belong together. We build environments designed to make that feel true. We're extraordinarily good at it. And then we go home and we reach for the same thing. And because the industry treats it as entirely normal, because the majority of our staff are young and can absorb it without any visible consequence, because the culture of the trade socializes around it, it doesn't register as a choice. It registers as just what this life looks like. The margins of this industry are thin enough that everything already feels like it's working against you. The financial pressure, the staffing challenges, the unpredictability, the way every bad week lands personally because your identity is fused with that business. That combination creates a particular kind of sustained pressure that needs somewhere to go at the end of the day. And the industry hands you the answer before you've even asked the question. And as you get older, you don't slide out of those habits. What felt manageable at 25 starts to accumulate differently at 35 and 40. The recovery time lengthens, the impact on sleep deepens, the apathy that was once a day thing becomes a background state. But by then the habit is so entrenched that it barely feels like a habit. It just feels like who you are. It's more prominent in this industry than anyone lets on. I'm certain of that from my own experience and from the founders that I work with. More normalized than any other industry would allow, and almost never framed as a leadership issue. I want to get specific about the physical cost because I think this is the part that lands differently to the usual conversation about drinking and health. The mornings were where it was most visible to me, even if I didn't name it as such at the time. Going to bed late, sleeping in later, and telling myself that 7 hours is 7 hours regardless of when they fall, which is technically true, but practically nonsense. The quality of sleep after a heavy evening is not the same as the quality of sleep that arrives naturally. The body is processing things rather than restoring itself. And the difference between those two things shows up the moment you open your eyes. The first hour of the day, when it should have been the thing that set the tone for everything that followed, was instead a period of recovery, moving through mud, slow and deliberate and almost without drive. A person going through the motions of starting the day rather than someone actually starting it. And that matters enormously for a founder because the morning is where the thinking happens, the planning, the decision making that requires a clear head rather than a reactive one. The work that only you can do and that everyone else is depending on. When the mornings are written off, the high value work gets pushed to later in the day when the head is finally clear. And then later in the day, the business is making noise and the team needs things and the operational demands have accumulated and the high value work just doesn't happen at all. That's the practical cost of the ungoverned evening. Not one bad morning, a structural pattern in which the hours that should have been most productive are consistently least available. Before I go any further, I just want to mention my Lead Well community. It's a free space for hospitality founders where we have the conversations that the industry doesn't usually make room for. If any of this is landing, the link's in the description. It's completely free. Come and find us. The mornings were the most visible symptom, but the costs went wider than that. Apathy set in around the business. The problems that needed solving got pushed to a secondary priority. The things that were specifically my responsibility as a founder, the things that only I could address, started being avoided rather than confronted. Not calling staff up on the things that needed addressing, turning up and doing the minimum, treating the business like a job rather than something I'd built and believed in. That last part is worth sitting with. The distance between founder and employee mindset is usually the energy that you bring to the thing that you've created, the investment of self, the willingness to do what needs doing even when it's difficult or uncomfortable or would be easier to leave for another day. That investment was diminishing and I was rationalizing the diminishment as the business being hard rather than myself being less than I needed to be. The decision-making quality was affected too, not dramatically. The ordinary daily erosion of judgment that comes from operating on poor sleep and a system that's never fully clear. The slightly slower thinking, the slightly more reactive responses, the slightly reduced capacity for the kind of long-term strategic thinking that running a business actually requires, and the emotional regulation, the irritability and the rawness and the disproportionate responses that I'd have explored in other videos on this channel. The anger aimed outward that was at least partly the expression of someone who was angry at themselves and had nowhere else to put it. When I eventually decided to change and I look back at that period, honestly, I had to acknowledge that what I was reaching for at the end of the day was a significant contributing factor to the version of myself that I'd grown to dislike. The connection between the ungoverned evenings and the difficult mornings and the compromised leadership wasn't something that I'd drawn clearly while I was inside it, but it was there. The team saw the result without knowing the cause. They knew I was going through a difficult period with the business. They probably attributed what they were experiencing to that. And they weren't entirely wrong, but they were getting the version that was managing the situation, which is not the same thing. Here's how it changed. And I want to tell this honestly because the honest version is more useful than the dramatic turning point. I got ill over Christmas and New Year, properly ill, the kind where you don't have a choice about anything for a while. And when January came around, I decided to do dry January just to clear the system. No grand declaration, just a practical reset. At the end of January, I decided to extend it through to my half marathon that I was running at the end of March. I wanted to prepare properly, and drinking while training seriously doesn't work. So I just kept going. Then the house renovation happened. A few months of absolute brutality. Structural issues that ate the entire budget, living effectively out of a holiday flat with my wife, a dog, and my lodger and 2 cats while doing all the work ourselves to save money. Running the business alongside it. And my mum was really ill at the same time. The consultancy was launching, several full-time commitments running simultaneously in a way that I couldn't have managed if I'd been in my old patterns. By the time everything settled, I was 6 months in and it hadn't even been a decision. It had been a series of circumstances that removed the habit before I'd consciously chosen to remove it. And the realization that arrived wasn't emotional, it was practical. I couldn't have done any of that if I'd been in my old patterns. The 6 months proved something I couldn't have argued myself into believing, that the version of me without the habit was meaningfully more capable than the version with it. Not because I was a different person, because the same person had access to more of himself. The mornings changed first and most noticeably. Sleep that actually restored rather than just filled the hours. Waking up as a person who was present rather than one who was recovering. The first hour of the day becoming something that belonged to me rather than something that I was working through. The morning routine that I've talked about on this channel becoming possible, not just as a concept, but as a daily reality, because the platform it needed to stand on was finally there. The thinking cleared, not overnight, gradually and then noticeably. The apathy that had been sitting over the business like a weather system started to lift. The problems that had been on secondary priority moved back to where they actually needed to be. The willingness to confront the things that needed confronting returned. The capacity to be the founder rather than just the operator came back. The exercise became consistent in a way that it hadn't been. The breath work became something that I could actually feel rather than just perform. And my time with Siobhan, my wife, became much more present. The hobbies, the 3D printing, the painting, the things that restore a nervous system rather than deplete it, became accessible again in a way they hadn't been when the evenings were going in a very different direction. And something more fundamental underneath all of that, the capability that had always been there, that I'd always known was there, started to become accessible again in a sustained way. Not a new capability, the original one, the one that the Ungoverned evenings had been quietly containing. I'm not going to tell you that it transformed everything overnight. It didn't, but the direction was clear and it was consistent. And the compound effect of better mornings leading to better thinking, leading to better decisions, leading to better leadership, leading to better business, it's not small. It accumulates over weeks and months into something that looks from the outside like a completely different person. But it isn't. It's the same person with fewer things working against them. So here's the reframe that I want to offer. And I want to be careful about how I offer it because I mean it exactly as I say it and not as anything more. This is not a sobriety pitch. I still have the occasional drink, a glass of wine on a holiday, something to mark a genuine occasion. What I found is I can stop there now in a way I couldn't before, which tells me something about what the habit was doing that the moderate version wasn't. What I'm offering is a leadership question. One that any founder can sit with honestly, regardless of where they are on this. Are the things that should be yours being swallowed by what you're reaching for at the end of the day? Are your mornings written off instead of belonging to you? Are the hobbies and the things that restore you taking a back seat so that the numbing can happen? Are the hours that should be given something back instead setting up to next day's deficit? If you're going through the worst of what this industry has to offer, if you're experiencing the mood swings, the bad sleep, the anxiety, the panic attacks, the things that appear across this channel again and again, consider seriously how much of that is being amplified by what you're reaching for when the shift ends. Whether the thing that you're using to decompress is actually decompressing you, or whether it's compounding the very thing that you're trying to escape. The reframe is this. It's not a moral question. It's not about willpower or character or what kind of person you are. It's about whether what you're doing with your evenings is setting up your mornings. Whether the ungoverned hours are producing the version of yourself that can lead, or the version that can just about get by. Moderation is the goal of anything. Even good things taken to excess have a cost. The question isn't whether you drink or what you reach for at the end of a hard day. The question is whether what you're reaching for is giving you back more than it's taking. Because if the answer is no, that's a leadership problem, and leadership problems have leadership solutions. Take a few months and see what changes. Not a pledge, not a program, just enough time to find out whether the version of you that isn't managing the evenings that way is different in ways that matter to the business and to the life you're trying to build around it. Because I think you'll find, as I did, that it is, and that the difference isn't small. We started with the version of this that doesn't look like a problem, the functioning version, the pretty good at getting by version, the version that's happening in this industry at a scale that nobody is talking about honestly, because the industry itself normalizes it before you've had a chance to question it. What I hope you're taking from this isn't guilt or alarm. It's a question worth sitting with. One practical and honest question about whether the pattern that you've built around your evenings is serving the leader you're trying to be or quietly working against them. The version of you that's capable of building something great is in there. I know that because I know what this industry asks of people, and I know what it means that you're still in it. The question is what you're doing with the hours that should be restoring that version so it can show up the next morning. The Lead Well community is free, remember, and the link is in the description, so come and find us. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like and a subscribe. It helps me, it helps the channel, and it helps people like us find the content that really matters. And as always, I'd love to remind you that you matter too. Don't forget that.